This is the story of the first time I saw Grand Canyon Railway 4960. Now, some of you may know that I have had and continue to have a long, illustrious career at Grand Canyon Railway. Today, I'm one of the key people to maintain the steam locomotive fleet, including the 4960, but even before I began this career, I visited Grand Canyon Railway several times as a tourist. The first was in 1989 on a vacation with my family. It was Thanksgiving weekend and the train had only been operating for a few months. We watched the train pull into Williams in the evening, but did not ride. My first ride was in the summer of 1994, when my brother and I came up on a day trip from Phoenix. I recorded that trip on an old camcorder. The video is unremarkable, except to document the current state of operations at that time. However, that trip did give me an idea of what daily operations were like and a general layout of the line. Then in 1996, I saw an ad in Trains magazine for a special photo excursion featuring the newly restored Mikado 4960, taking place the first Saturday in October. A couple things struck me as odd about that ad. First, it wasn't put out by Grand Canyon Railway specifically, but instead by the Grand Canyon chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. Now, even though I had ridden many tourist trains in my life, I didn't know exactly what the NRHS was, and I didn't know what a photo charter was. I assumed it was a debut trip of the new locomotive for special VIPs. And since these were the days before the World Wide Web and social media, it was not as easy to research these things as it is today. Second, the date was in October, and I knew that GCR typically stopped running the steam engines at the end of September each year. The ad had a phone number to call for information and tickets, but I assumed that the price would be too steep and I was on a limited budget, so I did not call to get answers to my questions. But I did mark the date on my calendar for a train chase. In all the tourist trains I had ridden at that time and all the steam engines I had seen, I had never seen one in operation as large as the 4960. So I borrowed my friend's pickup and made plans for a day trip to the Grand Canyon from Phoenix. I knew that the regular passenger train departed at 9:30 a.m., so I assumed that 4960 would depart at the same time. My youngest brother came along and we threw our mountain bikes in the back of the truck. I should mention that this image and the remaining ones were all taken with a 35mm disposable film camera. We arrived in Williams probably about 8:45 or so. There was a 5-car train sitting in front of the depot with Alcos 6773 and 6793, but no steam engine. At first, I thought maybe they would bring 4960 over from the shop closer to departure, but as time went by, I began to get more worried. So I went into the ticket counter to ask, "Hey, where's that big steam engine you guys just put in service?" The staff looked at each other with confusion until one of them in the back seemed to know the answer and said, "Hey, I think it left with a special train earlier this morning." "Do you know what time?" I asked. "I think about 7:30, is what they replied. Well, now it's about 9 o'clock. The steam trains left over an hour and a half earlier, and I knew that they had a 2-hour train trip to the canyon, and I had a 1-hour drive on the highway. It looked like I wasn't going to get the shot pulling into the yard that I wanted, so I was feeling pretty discouraged. But my brother and I quickly loaded into the truck and headed north anyway. When we arrived at the Grand Canyon, we found a train sitting in front of the depot, but it wasn't the one that we expected. Instead, there was this monstrous passenger train with Amtrak locomotives on the front. We started riding our bikes to the rear, checking out the cars. Several of them were lettered for the American Orient Express. One of them was a dome car that I was quite enamored with, since I think that this was probably the first time I had seen an actual operating dome car. And being a California Zephyr fan, that was kind of cool. As we were heading toward the rear of the train, there were 2 whistle blows and the train started heading forward down the main towards Williams. I knew there was a dirt road heading south that parallels the tracks, and this is where the mountain bikes came in. So we followed the train out of the yard and were surprised to find that it stopped with the head end about milepost 62, after only going about a mile. So we went down past the head end to where the tracks crossed a stream on a small bridge where I wanted to set up for my shot. We waited for probably close to an hour. Then the Amtrak train sounded 3 whistles and started backing up. This time we didn't chase, but waited in our location for what I expected to be a soon-to-arrive 4960. We did hear a horn in the distance, but it wasn't the Amtrak, and it wasn't a steam whistle. Instead, it was an Alco horn, and soon 6773 came around the corner with its passenger train. A few minutes later, the Amtrak train pulled back down to its previous location, and after another 15 minutes or so, steam whistles echoed up at the valley. Again, the Amtrak train backed up into the canyon. Several years later, after I started working for GCR, I would learn what this strange back and forth maneuver was all about. Well, the steam whistles grew louder along with the familiar chuff-chuff of an engine working hard up grade, and in a few moments, the 4960 came barreling around the corner at 25 miles an hour. I was pretty impressed by the size of the machine, and the ground shook as it went by. This shot is the rear of the train and shows the observation car, Chief Keokuk. This was a leased car from Keokuk, Iowa. 1996 would be its last season on GCR, as another car had been purchased to replace it for the 1997 season. So my brother and I headed back up the dirt road, and I quickly got to feel how much biking a mile uphill at 7,000 feet elevation was more exhausting than the gentle coast that we had downhill an hour before. At the canyon, the Amtrak train had again departed, this time for good. 4960's train backed in on track 3, and the diesels were backed in on track 4. At that time, GCR was using track 3 as the primary track for passenger deboarding, so the diesel train had probably moved to track 4 after the passengers unloaded, which set up this great side-by-side shot of the motive power. In this shot, you can see the Grand Canyon Log Depot in the background on the left of the train. This is the only photo I got of the depot that day. Closer to the camera is another small building, which I believe was an old Santa Fe structure to house boilers to supply steam to the passenger cars while they were parked at the depot. National Park Service would tear this building down a few years later. Talking with one of the passengers, they informed me that they had stopped many times to perform photo run-bys and again in a siding to let the diesel train go in front. They would be stopping on the return trip again for more run-bys as well. So my brother and I left the canyon before the steam train departed. A few miles outside the national park, I noticed some vehicles turning on a dirt road to the west. I decided to follow, and after 15 minutes or so, we reached the railroad tracks at a place called Anita. After a while, the steam train arrived, and we got a few shots. While we were waiting for the train, one of the other photographers had asked me if I was familiar with the area. I said no. He said the train was scheduled to stop at a siding about 7 miles up the track and let the diesel train pass. There was a dirt road that headed south from where we were standing that looked like it would parallel the tracks, and he wondered if it would get us there. After the train went by, I saw several vehicles head out on that road to the south, and I decided to follow. At some points, the road was little more than 2 wagon ruts in the dirt. Ground clearance was needed, and we had to stop several times to cross cattle fences. But eventually, we did catch up to the steam train, which was parked in a siding at a place called Willaha. The passengers were set up for a photo line to get the passing diesel train, and we joined them. It wasn't too long before the Alcos came running around the corner and passed us at 40 miles per hour. The guy that I had been talking to at Anita came walking up after the diesels went by, having arrived too late to get the shot of the meet. He had decided not to risk the unknown dirt road, but instead headed back out to the highway and back in on another dirt road, a total trip of about 25 miles. He said that he could have made it, but he would have screamed through the crossing at the last minute, kicking up dirt and ruining everyone's picture, so at the last minute he slowed down and gave up his shot. I asked if the dirt road between Willaha and the highway was any good, and he said, "That's a 70-mile-an-hour dirt road." Once the steam train pulled out of the siding, I headed back out to the highway, and sure enough, he was right. It was one of the best dirt roads I've ever been on. The posted speed is 35 miles per hour, and you can certainly drive faster, but I'm not sure about 70. The last place we caught the train was at a place called Red Lake, where the highway and railroad tracks parallel each other closely for about a mile. This is the SB Road crossing. Today, SB Road is paved with crossing gates. We headed the remaining miles into town to catch the train arriving at the depot, but it hadn't yet arrived. I found my way onto Airport Road, where I could look across the field towards the shops. I was surprised to find little Consolidation 18 sitting on the main outside the shop, fired up. I could see smoke through the trees north of town and figured that's where the 4960 was. Soon a headlight appeared through the tunnel under the Santa Fe tracks, and 4960 slowly crept through and pulled its train up to the shop. 18 coupled on the front, and the 2 engines backed the 6 cars through the tunnel. My brother and I headed north on Airport Road, and we could see smoke rising up through the trees to the east. We knew they were doing run-bys just north of town, but were unable to find a road to get us there. These photos were taken during the photo charter of 1997 when 18 and 4960 double-headed all the way to the canyon. Our chase ended when the photo special arrived at the depot after dark, so no more photos were taken that day, but it was a great day. And the following year, when I saw another photo charter advertised, I made sure to purchase a ticket. But the rest of those photos are going to be for another time.